Hello and welcome to another anime lore and theory video. I'm Shergok, your host, and today we are going to take a closer look at why Ainz Ooal is mid, and why this is, or at least could actually be, quite important in the upcoming novel. But before we are going to take a closer look at any of this, let me quickly thank my Patreons for supporting this channel, as well as a thanks to all users of the YouTube thanks function for making one-time donations. And with that said, let's get to the topic at hand. Ainz Ooal, Overlord of the Great Tomb of Nezarec and leader of the 41 Supreme Beings who created one of the most formidable player-killer guilds in all of Yggdrasil, was surprisingly not considered particularly powerful or dangerous. Rather, he was mid, in the sense of being mediocre. Naturally, this raises the question, why? But first I'd like to dispel a common myth, namely that Ainz was the strongest player in the guild, or that the entire command structure of the Great Tomb of Nezarec was actually based on strength alone. That's not true. Rubedo is the strongest being in all of Nezarec, and Albedo's little sister is merely some area guardian somewhere at most. And interestingly, the strongest floor in Nezarec, the 8th, where Rubedo actually resides, is also guarded by Victim, a level 35 angel, and he's by far the weakest floor guardian in terms of raw combat power. And we also see this one floor above, because Demiurge, for instance, is much weaker than the magma slime Gurren, who's merely an area guardian and not a floor guardian. And in Nezarec, Ainz Ooal was relatively easily surpassed, because Tarbudas Magdina was a caster who surpassed Ainz in terms of magic power. Albert Elaine Oddle also surpassed him in magic power. And also in behavior and presentation, he was basically the Megumin equivalent of Nezarec. So in a sense, he was also a better role player, or at least a more dedicated one. And his ultimate spell was likely the strongest spell in the entire game of Yggdrasil, because it even surpassed super tier magic, Grand Catastrophe. And of course, Ainz Ooal was also easily defeated by Touch Me, the former leader and guildmaster of the guild. And interestingly, and unsurprisingly, Ainz never even won a single duel against the world champion, which brings up the important question, why was Ainz actually made the leader and not Touch Me? Well, Ainz was more socially agreeable and less opinionated, and Touch Me had a rigid and idealistic sense of justice that he insisted on enforcing upon every single being in Nezarec every single instance that he could. Something that annoyed edgy players like Ulbert, and when Touch Me actually was the guild leader of the predecessor organization, Nine's own goal, he clashed so hard with other Nezarec players that eventually one of them left the guild. Ainz, on the other hand, was more reserved and balanced, a good listener, as seen at the beginning of Volume 1, when he talks with Hiro, and that's why essentially by popular vote he was made the guildmaster. But the position of guildmaster was more of a ceremonial and administrative role and title, and he was more of a mediator and planner, since major decisions were made by majority vote. However, just because Ainz had this diplomatic role doesn't mean he was completely incapable of combat. Ainz was, for instance, able to win the majority of his battles against the enemies of Nezarec. Still, Ainz Ooal's character build was not optimized for direct combat, like Pero Ronchino's was. It was more of a role-playing build, designed around the idea of being an undead overlord. And in fact, Albert was even so inspired by all of this that he created Demiurge, his personal NPC and floor guardian of the 7th floor, in Ainz Ooal's image. So in other words, Ainz was not built for the competitive scene he spent years in. Which brings up another question. How was he even able to keep up with all of his role-playing build? The first major reason is his equipment. Ainz Ooal is decked out from head to toe in premium gear, meaning every single item he owns is of the highest rarity tier. And these are so rare that most regular players never even owned a single item of this level, and that alone makes Ainz stronger than most average players. He basically sunk a third of his salary into Yggdrasil on 9, and that also likely explains his massive mana pool, at least in part. Additionally, Ainz was in one of the top PvP pro guilds of the entire in-game world, so he knew all these strategies and tactics. He was also personally very skilled and belonged to the top 10 players who could flawlessly time their skills for maximum synergy, so he could fully capitalize on all of these synergy effects in combat, as seen when he offed Gazev Stronov. And with that said, his role-playing build still held him back. He wouldn't be considered mid if he had chosen a more competitive build like Peroronchinos. And interestingly, there might be a competitive version of Ainz Ooal in the New World, namely Surshana, the death god of the theocracy of Slain. And I say this because his scythe, Sharon's Guidance, included the spell Death, a very basic spell of the 4th tier. So why would he embed such a low-level spell into a legendary scythe? Well, I think it's because Surshana must have been a character build similar to Ainz Ooal, because otherwise he wouldn't even be able to use the spell The Goal of All Life is Death during his, let's call it, lifetime, because that skill required at least a minimal investment into death magic to unlock the Eclipse class. And the fact that Surshana embedded such a low-level death spell into this legendary weapon might hint that he, unlike Ainz, might have min-maxed his build. And he put as little power into his fairly useless death spells as possible and outsourced a lot of the basically possession of these types of spells into his equipment and gear, so he could min-max himself to be truly devastating. And it would be fascinating if Rufus, Surshana's first servant, had been working for centuries to resurrect his undead master. And this could then all lead to a confrontation between Ainz Ooal, the sub-optimally built undead Overlord of Nezarec, and Surshana, who may be min-maxed and basically a min-maxed version of Ainz Ooal's exact role-playing build, which would make the clash quite interesting. Anyway, that's my explanation of why Ainz is mid and how this idea might tie back into the story, especially since Ainz is now looking to invade the theocracy of Slain. And with that said, now it's your turn. What's your opinion about the topic? Let me know it down in the comment section. And while you type, I say thank you very much for watching, thanks to all of my Patreons for supporting this channel, and as usual, I say my special thanks to Ada Daddy Ada, ASK, Bad Girl Ye, Bad Burrito 316, Beezer, Ben C, Brandon S, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Crystal Prime, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Din Pep, Dragonlord Placido Saxophone, Duckwagon, Dunkler Krieger, Dystopia, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feralchivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Lee K. Long, Legendarius, Le Louche Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Lothrazer, Merowek, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, Oh Kill, Overlord General Gaspar, Paddy Pentum, Personage, Ruru, Primus 11, Rhinomere, Q&A Caracos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Sir Axolotl, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc Warboss, Rocket Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Xenokai, Ernst Sonnegon, Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.